All right, thank you everyone so much for being here. We are DOEE 1. We worked with the Department of Energy and Environment of the District of Columbia to look at their sustainable procurement system and recommend some things for improving their specification development process. So I'm joined up here by my teammates Tanner, Rita, Reed, and Hallie. And we're just going to do a little roadmap. So first we did a quick project overview, followed by an EPS program overview. Then we're going to move into further programs, current versus ideal specification development process, looking at their contract language and tracking recommendations, followed by training, barriers and opportunities, and then some key recommendations.
So when we talk about procurement, we're talking about the process of acquiring goods and services through different external contracts and purchasing mechanisms in order to meet the needs of an organization. So that can be anything from computer equipment to construction materials, but what really makes it sustainable is completing these needs of the organization while also minimizing the environmental degradation that comes with ordering these large inventory orders for these organizations. And that's what the DOEE is doing in the Office of Contracting and Procurement through their Environmentally Preferable Products and Services program, which identifies eco-friendly alternatives for people to utilize instead of the conventional alternatives. And that was really brought upon through 2010 for the Procurement Practices Reform Act, which kind of started this eco-friendly purchasing practice. And as it developed, we saw the DOEE get involved in 2021 through the Green Food Purchasing Amendment, which required us to step in and help develop a certification system for these different product categories of procurement. And so some of the DC initiatives aligned with this EPS program are their Sustainable DC 2.0 with their Governance 1.7, which is literally just what I described. It's about greenifying the district through these procurement practices, and through their Zero Waste Plan, which is achieving 80% green spending. Currently, the DOEE has a mandatory statute that requires a environmental certification for any contract over $100,000 that demonstrates the purchase of EPS. And these are just some common eco labels that we find that are these eco-friendly alternatives for a variety of products.
So we had a wide variety of knowledge when we started this project. So we conducted some informational interviews with key organizations like the EPA, Harvard, City of Portland, Boston University, State of Maryland, amongst others. And here's just some key challenges and takeaways from those interviews. So one of the first key challenges was maintaining uniform language. It definitely promotes adoption, so our recommendation is to continuously update their template model contract language. Next, tracking metrics was definitely very hard for many of these programs, so we are recommending that they include impact metrics and the actual requirements into contracts. Followed by promoting adoption across agencies. We're recommending that they pre-certify certain vendors to make it easier for them to be purchased along the DC supply schedule, as well as hosting trainings for procurement specialists. Maryland actually has a great program for this, so we included some more detailed recommendations there. Next is regional coordination and communication. The Sustainable Purchasing Leadership Council, which DOEE is a part of, hosts roundtables and many discussions, so we recommended that they actually take full advantage of this resource. And finally, scaling impact across agencies. We recommended that they build relationships with a small group of vendors to just ensure that constant supply of sustainable products.
We also looked at a few leading programs, specifically Orange County, California, the Massachusetts Operational Services Division, and the US EPA.
So both Orange County and Massachusetts use something called best value scoring within their solicitations. And this allows for vendors to earn points based on environmental performance of the product. And this allows products to be evaluated on that environmental performance also with the cost and not just cost alone. And we recommend DC implement this through using optional sustainability scoring criteria within their specifications.
Massachusetts also does a process and project plan, which we also recommend that the DOEE do prior to spec development, essentially looking at a product's climate impact, market readiness, and required eco-labels and disclosures.
And Orange County also includes life cycle costing language within their solicitations. And this allows products to be evaluated for their total life cycle cost, which includes purchase, operation, maintenance, and disposal, rather than just being evaluated on the short-term savings of maybe the cheaper product.
We also recommend that the EPS team includes a 5% price preference for goods that meet certain environmental criteria, inspired also by what Orange County is doing, to help green vendors remain more competitive during the bidding process, even if their products come with slightly higher upfront costs.
And the EPA has developed a framework to assess eco-labels and environmental standards, and we recommended that DOEE reference this framework when creating new specifications, because the inclusion of eco-labels can help promote the credibility of the specification and also streamline the decision-making process involved. So now we're going to take a look at what the current specification development process looks like for the EPS team, and then what our developed ideal specification process looks like. So starting with the current process, this is just a snapshot of how it's been going for the past few years. And they consider a few key factors when creating a new specification. They start with the highest spend procurement categories and product categories so that they can make the most impact with one specification. And they also look at the environmental impact of products, any existing legislation, any guidance that the EPA or SPLC can offer, and also any alignment with district sustainability goals.
Specifications also aren't static. They're subject to changes in the market, new or updated sustainability goals, as well as technological advancement.
So now we're going to take a look at what our ideal specification development process is. I know it's a lot of words, but so we took their current process and enhanced it based on everything we've learned from our informational interviews and outside research, and this is what we've landed on for our process.
So one of the key aspects of this new process is that it involves getting a lot of input from vendors and agencies. So essentially, new specifications are vetted prior to implementation, which should facilitate easier rollout and more compliance.
So while looking at this specification development, we also wanted to look at what the timeline might look like after these are implemented. So as Rita and Reed mentioned, we want to prioritize these products by these product categories by how much they're being spent at DOEE. For them, that might look like landscaping services or food services, which ended up being their largest amount of green spend for last fiscal year. And also incorporating this model contract language straight into their draft specification development in order to streamline these drafts and get them out as quickly as possible. And then finally, updating specifications over creating new ones due to the foundation that is currently already established from the existing ones. And then this is just a little timeline of what I just said, kind of put into a little timeline to reduce it from 2 calendar years that is currently being completed for DOEE down to hopefully 1 year.
So here are some considerations that we took into account when developing model contract language for DOEE. So first, we wanted to implement a total cost of ownership calculation requirement. We also wanted to embed compliance with EPS as a key performance metric in the contract. We also wanted to implement training requirements in order to build a vendor capacity for future EPS compliance, and also formal substitution language, which we recommended to DOEE to prevent backsliding and make sure that alternative products remain compliant. So DOEE faces a large opportunity to improve their tracking, both in terms of how the spec development process works and also the overall program. So we developed some metric recommendations for them, which can be implemented into quarterly and annual reporting. So examples of this are the average time from draft to publication to measure efficiency, and also the number of waivers granted per spec to measure the hardest specs to comply with.
And also in an effort to increase training and buy-in from these different buyers, we also wanted to incorporate an infographic like what you might see on the screen and give them to these buyers in order to better understand if they're purchasing something that is required for EPS, and then they would follow said flow chart down to whatever they might need for their purchase.
So now we'll get into some barriers that our project aims to overcome. So the first is that procurement officers across DC's agencies may accidentally bypass or overlook EPS when facing time pressures or knowledge gaps. Also, agencies have to accommodate new specifications being developed by DOE while also balancing reporting requirements that we're now recommending. And also, renewals and extensions are very common for contracts in DOE and DC overall. So making sure that reassessment of EPS feasibility is embedded. The most extreme risk that DOE currently faces with the program is that there's limited vendor engagement thus far, which would lead to lower adoption of the program overall. And it's also hard to balance agency, vendor, and DOEE and OCP priorities in one process that makes sure that everyone is aligned. So we wanted to leave off with some key recommendations for DOEE. And so we have some concrete recommendations, such as the implementation of a public-facing dashboard where they can publish metrics which would increase public accountability. We also recommend that they implement pre-bid technical assistance, especially for vendors that have limited prior engagement to EPS. And we also recommend that DOE establishes an agency representative committee to make sure stakeholder engagement periods are more streamlined. And then in contracts, we recommend implementing price preferences, lifecycle costing requirements, and reporting requirements. And DOE also is currently involved in some collaboration opportunities, so we also recommend that they more fully leverage those opportunities and that should be a priority. So that's all that we have, and thank you so much.